When the God MC Rakim speaks, the culture listens. But this time, his words didn't just echo, they detonated. As the world still debates Drake versus Kendrick, Rakim made a statement that stunned fans and shifted the conversation entirely. He declared that Kendrick's recent speech, his words, his truth, his raw honesty was bigger than any album release. Think about that for a second. Albums define careers, move charts, and cement legacies. Yet Rakim is saying one speech, one moment of authenticity, carried more power than an entire body of work. For fans, this wasn't just commentary. It was history being written in real time. The response? Explosive. Social media erupted. Hip-hop forums went crazy. And fans called it the most important cultural cosign of the decade. Hashtag Rakim Speaks, hashtag Kendrick Legacy, hashtag hip-hop history to understand the weight of what Rakim just said. You first have to understand who Rakim is and why his words still carry more power than an entire industry's PR machine. In the late 1980s, when hip-hop was still evolving from its raw block party roots, Rakim redefined what it meant to be an MC. Before ham rap was energetic and fun, but often simple in its rhyme structures. Then came Rakim.com, calculated, poetic, and razor-sharp with his delivery. His partnership with Eric B. produced classics like Paid in Full and Follow the Leader. Projects that not only shifted the sound, but also raised the lyrical bar forever. That's why he's called the God Mick. Now fast forward to today. Most legends from Rakim's era tend to sit on the sidelines. Respected but silent when it comes to modern hip-hop beefs and debates. But Rakim breaking that silence to speak on Kendrick Lamar isn't just rare, it's monumental. And what he said was even more powerful. Kendrick's recent speech about truth, integrity, and the state of the culture was, in his view, bigger than any album. Why does that matter? Let's unpack it. Albums have always been the currency of credibility in hip-hop. From NASA's Illmatic to Jay-Z's Reasonable Doubt to Kanye's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Entire legacies have been defined by groundbreaking records. They're the milestones that fans point to when debating who belongs on the Mount Rushmore of hip-hop. But Rakim suggesting that Kendrick's speech alone surpassed the impact of an album is something else entirely. It shifts the focus from the product, the music, to the person, the artist. What Rakim was really saying is that Kendrick's words, his raw, unfiltered truth, mattered more than streams, sales, or even Grammy Awards. In a culture that's become obsessed with numbers and charts, this was a reset button. It was a reminder that hip-hop at its core has always been about truth-telling, storytelling, and speaking for those who can't. And who better to validate that than Rakim, the blueprint for lyrical honesty? Fans instantly understood the gravity of the statement. When clips of Rakim's comments surfaced, timelines exploded. Some wrote, "If Rakim said it, it's official. Kendrick is the voice of the people." Others said, "This isn't just a cosign. This is history being written," and many agreed that no album, not Drake's views, not Kendrick's own DAMN, not even Jay-Z's Blueprint could compete with the power of words spoken at the right time. But what was it about Kendrick's speech that hit so hard? According to insiders, Kendrick wasn't talking about numbers, money, or even his own success. He was speaking from a place of pain, honesty, and resilience. He addressed the pressure of fame, the toxicity of industry politics, and the need for hip-hop to return to truth. For Rakim to say that was bigger than an album meant he recognized the purity of the message. It was Kendrick choosing substance over spectacle, and in doing so, he reminded everyone what real artistry looks like. Think of it this way. An album can dominate for a year, maybe a decade if it's legendary. But a speech can echo for generations. Dr. King's I Have a Dream, Tupac's interviews about poverty and racism, even Nipsey Hussle's words about community ownership. These weren't albums, they were moments where truth leaped out of one person's soul and into the hearts of millions. Kendrick's speech fell into that category. And Rakim stamped it as history. And here's why that matters even more right now. Hip-hop has been caught in a tug-of-war between artistry and entertainment. On one side, you have commercial juggernauts like Drake, who dominate charts, rack up streams, and command arenas. On the other, you have artists like Kendrick, who prioritize depth, lyricism, and social commentary. Rakim's words didn't just praise Kendrick, they challenged the entire culture to rethink what really matters. Are we here for hits, or are we here for truth? It's no coincidence fans immediately called this historic. Because when Rakim spoke, it felt less like one legend praising another, and more like a generational handoff. It was the God MC crowning Kendrick as the modern torchbearer of authenticity. And for Kendrick, who has often positioned himself as an outsider in the mainstream, this was the ultimate validation. So let's pause here and take this in. Rakim just told the world that Kendrick's speech, not an album, not a hit single, not a Grammy win, was bigger than any body of work. That's a once-in-a-lifetime statement in a culture that usually worships records and plaques, and fans knew it instantly. Tweets, TikToks, and Instagram posts lit up with captions like, "This is bigger than Drake versus Kendrick. This is hip-hop versus industry albums fade. Truth lasts forever." Rakim just made history by acknowledging history. This wasn't just hype. It was a moment. And the more you think about it, the more it feels like a turning point for the culture itself. The moment Rakim's words hit the internet, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fans didn't just nod in agreement. They erupted as if they had been waiting for someone of his stature to say what they already felt. Social media platforms became ground zero for this cultural explosion, with hashtags like #RAKIMSpeaks, #KendrickTheTruth, and #HipHopHistory trending within hours. On Twitter X, posts poured in at lightning speed. One fan wrote, "Forget album sales. Forget charts." Rakim just confirmed what we already knew. Kendrick is the only one carrying the torch of authenticity. Another said, "This isn't just about Kendrick versus Drake. This is about who represents the spirit of hip-hop." And Rakim just gave us the answer. Thousands of retweets and quote tweets amplified these sentiments, turning Rakim's cosign into something that felt less like commentary and more like a cultural declaration. Over on Instagram, hip-hop pages with millions of followers posted clips of Rakim's statement, often accompanied by side-by-side photos of him and Kendrick. The captions read like headlines. "The God MC declares Kendrick the truth." The comments sections were flooded with fire emojis, crowns, and fans calling the moment bigger than any chart battle. Some fans even edited videos splicing Rakim's words with footage of Kendrick's most iconic performances, making it feel like the passing of a torch in real time. TikTok, as always, added its own unique spin. Young creators, many of whom weren't even alive during Rakim's prime, began stitching Rakim's statement into their videos. They used it as audio for montages of Kendrick on stage in the studio and delivering his now famous speech. One viral video simply showed Kendrick standing on stage in silence before dropping his lines, overlaid with Rakim's quote, "Bigger than any album." The comments flooded in. Chills. This is why hip-hop matters. Speech can last longer than a song. What made this reaction different from other hip-hop moments was the sheer unanimity of it. Usually the culture is divided, half siding with one artist, half with the other. But Rakim's words transcended the typical fan wars. Even Drake's diehard supporters couldn't deny the significance of the God MC weighing in. Many reluctantly admitted, "I ride for Drake." But if Rakim says this, I can't argue. That level of agreement in hip-hop is almost unheard of. The ripple effect didn't stop with fans. Other artists and industry voices began chiming in. Some veterans from the golden era reposted the clip, praising Rakim for still having his finger on the pulse of the culture. A few mainstream rappers dropped subtle nods too, posting cryptic tweets like, "Truth always cuts deeper than numbers." Even producers and DJs, who usually stay neutral, spoke out about how Kendrick's speech was a reminder of what hip-hop was built on: storytelling, social commentary, and courage. Meanwhile, journalists and hip-hop critics rushed to put Rakim's words into historical context. Articles popped up with titles like, "Why Rakim's Praise of Kendrick Lamar is More Important Than a Grammy." Writers drew parallels between this moment and when Bob Dylan endorsed newer generations of musicians, or when Muhammad Ali acknowledged rising fighters as carrying his spirit. This wasn't just a cosign. It was validation from a pioneer that Kendrick's voice had transcended the art form itself. But the biggest conversation brewing among fans was this: why a speech? Why would Rakim declare Kendrick's spoken words as more powerful than any album drop? And the answers kept circling back to the idea of truth. Albums, no matter how raw or personal, are still packaged products. They're carefully curated, polished, and released with marketing strategies. A speech, however, is unfiltered. It's direct. It's one human being sharing raw emotion in real time. Fans pointed out that Kendrick's speech wasn't rehearsed like a verse or structured like a hook. It was spontaneous truth-telling. And that's why it resonated so deeply. One viral tweet summed it up perfectly. An album can top the charts. A speech can change lives. That line alone became its own mantra, reposted and shared thousands of times. It captured what so many felt, that this wasn't about music anymore. It was about legacy, integrity, and the power of words. Internationally, the reaction was just as intense. In the UK, grime and drill fans jumped into the debate, saying Kendrick's speech was a reminder of why lyricism and storytelling matter across all genres. In Nigeria, Afrobeat artists and fans posted about how authenticity is the only thing that truly connects an artist to their people, no matter the culture. Even in Japan and South Korea, hip-hop communities shared translations of Rakim's statement, framing it as a lesson for their own rising artists. Truth over numbers, courage over clout. For Kendrick, the fan reaction elevated his speech into something far bigger than he might have imagined when he first delivered it. What may have been a moment of honesty for him became a historical marker for the culture at large. And with Rakim's endorsement fueling the fire, the momentum only grew. By the end of the week, Kendrick wasn't just trending for his music, he was trending for his words. Headlines didn't ask about Drake anymore. They asked whether Kendrick had officially become the voice of this generation, not just musically, but philosophically. And fans weren't exaggerating when they called it history, because moments like this, in the past, present, and future of hip-hop collide, don't happen often. Rakim's silence had lasted decades, but with one statement, he rewrote the conversation. Fans understood immediately. This wasn't just about hip-hop. It was about truth. And truth never goes out of style. To fully grasp the magnitude of Rakim's statement, we need to look beyond the immediate fan reactions and into the deeper layers of what this means for hip-hop culture as a whole. This wasn't just Rakim praising Kendrick. This was Rakim making a declaration that shifts how we interpret not only the Kendrick versus Drake debate, but the entire legacy conversation in hip-hop. At its core, Rakim's words highlight a long-standing tension in the culture: substance versus spectacle. On one side, you have artists who prioritize chart-topping hits, mainstream dominance, and crossover appeal, Drake being the most obvious example. On the other, you have artists like Kendrick, who deliberately reject industry expectations in favor of artistic integrity, social commentary, and lyrical mastery. Both approaches create superstars, but only one of them leaves behind a legacy rooted in authenticity. Rakim, the original lyrical craftsman, made it clear which side he respects more by saying Kendrick's speech was bigger than any album. Rakim reframed the debate entirely. Suddenly, it wasn't about whose records sold more, who had the most #1 hits, or even who won the lyrical exchanges in their ongoing beef. It was about who stood up for the culture, who carried forward the essence of hip-hop, and who had the courage to tell the truth when it wasn't convenient. In Rakim's eyes, Kendrick didn't just win a rap battle. He embodied what the art form was created for. This sentiment resonates deeply when you think about Rakim's own career. He was never the flashy artist chasing chart dominance. Instead, he was the one crafting intricate rhyme schemes and elevating hip-hop into an art form. In many ways, Kendrick is the spiritual descendant of that same philosophy. Both men rejected industry gimmicks and relied on lyricism as power. So when Rakim praises Kendrick, it feels like more than a cosign. It feels like a generational handshake. Fans picked up on this immediately, calling the moment a passing of the torch. For decades, people debated who Rakim's true successor was. Was it Nas in the 90s, with Illmatic being hailed as the greatest lyrical debut ever? Was it Jay-Z, who combined business savvy with wordplay? Or was it Eminem, whose technical skill rewrote the possibilities of rhyme patterns? All had strong claims, but Rakim himself had rarely weighed in. Until now. And with his words, he didn't just validate Kendrick as a dope rapper, he validated him as the torchbearer of truth. This is why so many fans are calling it historic, because this wasn't just a cosign of Kendrick's music. It was Rakim acknowledging Kendrick as a living embodiment of hip-hop's original mission. And that's something Drake, for all his commercial dominance, has never been seen as. Drake excels at blending genres, making chart-friendly anthems, and shifting with trends. But authenticity, speaking truth to power, that's never been his lane. Rakim's statement underscored that divide, widening it even further. This is also where the Kendrick versus Drake debate takes on a new dimension. Up until now, much of the discourse focused on bars, sales, and cultural dominance. Drake supporters argued that his global influence and consistent success made him untouchable. Kendrick fans countered with the depth, artistry, and replay value of his projects. But Rakim introduced a third metric: truth. And in that category, Kendrick stands alone. Think about how this changes the conversation. If legacy is no longer measured only by plaques or even lyrical skill, but by an artist's willingness to speak truthfully, then Drake can't compete. Kendrick becomes the default answer, not because of popularity contests, but because of principle. Rakim didn't just tip the scale, he reset the criteria. Entirely. Critics and fans alike also started to compare this moment to other passing the torch moments in hip-hop history. When Tupac praised Nas, when Jay-Z gave props to Kanye, or when Eminem shouted out Kendrick himself as one of the greatest lyricists alive. Each of those endorsements meant something. But Rakim's feels different. Because unlike the others, Rakim rarely speaks. And when he does, he doesn't exaggerate. His respect is reserved, his words measured. That's why his praise hits harder. It feels final, definitive, historic. Even more, Rakim's words elevate Kendrick's speech to a symbolic level. Fans began analyzing the parallels between Kendrick's moment and historical speeches outside of hip-hop. Some drew comparisons to Tupac's passionate interviews about systemic oppression, or even to the broader tradition of Black leaders using words to inspire change from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King Jr. They argued that Kendrick's willingness to speak uncomfortable truths connected him to a lineage much larger than rap itself. And Rakim, by saying this moment was bigger than an album, validated that idea. This led to another key question circulating online. Has Kendrick officially transcended the title of rapper and become something more, a cultural leader? For many, Rakim's words answered with a resounding yes. He was no longer just competing with Drake for musical dominance. He was stepping into a role as a generational voice. And once you cross into that territory, you can't be measured by sales or hits anymore. The Drake side of the debate, meanwhile, began to look shakier. While nobody denied his achievements, the optics of Rakim crowning Kendrick left Drake in a strange place. How could he respond? Drop another diss track? Break more streaming records? None of that could match the weight of Rakim's statement. In fact, some fans joked that no matter what Drake did musically, it would always pale in comparison to Kendrick speaking truth. Because how do you fight authenticity? At this point, fans began framing the conversation not as Kendrick versus Drake, but as truth versus performance. Kendrick had become the voice of truth. Validated by Rakim, Drake remained the master of performance, spectacle, and pop culture dominance. And while both roles have their place, Rakim made it clear which role carries legacy. As one viral TikTok put it, Drake makes hits. Kendrick makes history. And that line stuck. It echoed through comments, headlines, and podcasts discussing the culture. Rakim's words didn't just praise Kendrick. They gave the people a framework, a new lens through which to judge the present and future of hip-hop. From now on, truth would matter more than charts. Authenticity would outlast popularity. And Kendrick Lamar, in Rakim's eyes, was the living proof. Rakim's eyes was the living proof. Now that we've unpacked Rakim's statement, the fan reactions, and the way it reshaped the Kendrick versus Drake debate, the real question is this: what does this moment mean for the future? Because when Rakim, the God MC, the blueprint for lyricism, says Kendrick's speech is bigger than any album, he's not just speaking about the present. He's shaping the way hip-hop will be remembered for decades. First, let's look at Kendrick's legacy. Up until now, he's been seen as a lyrical genius. A Pulitzer Prize-winning rapper who delivered some of the most critically acclaimed albums of his generation. Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City to Pimp a Butterfly, D.A.M.N., and Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Each one has been dissected, debated, and praised for its artistry. But Rakim's words elevate Kendrick into a different category. They position him not just as a great artist, but as a cultural leader whose words have value beyond music. This means that even if Kendrick never released another album, his influence would remain untouchable. Because Rakim didn't measure him by streams or records, he measured him by truth. That's a new kind of immortality, and it's one that only a handful of rappers have ever achieved. Tupac had it. Lauryn Hill touched it. Nipsey Hussle carried it. And now, in Rakim's eyes, Kendrick stands in that same lineage. For Kendrick's fans, this changes everything. Instead of constantly having to argue with Drake supporters about sales or chart positions, they now have the ultimate cosign to point to. Rakim's words are bigger than numbers. They're a seal of authenticity that no one can erase. It means Kendrick's impact will always be measured not just by what he recorded, but by what he stood for. But what about Drake? For years, he's dominated hip-hop with hit after hit, carefully maintaining his image as the most consistent superstar of the modern era. But Rakim's statement leaves him in uncharted territory. Because no matter how many records Drake breaks, he may never receive the kind of validation Kendrick just got. Why? Because authenticity can't be manufactured. You can't buy it, you can't market it, and you can't stream it into existence. It comes from a lifetime of choices Kendrick has consistently made, and choices Drake has often avoided. This doesn't mean Drake is finished. His career is secure and his influence undeniable. But it does mean his legacy may always carry an asterisk. Fans will remember him as the hitmaker, the crossover king, the man who defined an era of mainstream hip-hop. But when the conversation shifts to truth-tellers, cultural leaders, and voices that last generations, Kendrick now has the edge, stamped by Rakim himself. That's a loss Drake can't undo with another album. The bigger impact, though, is on the next generation of artists. Hip-hop has always been shaped by role models. In the 90s, rappers grew up idolizing Rakim Nas, Biggie, and Tupac in the 2000s. Many chased the business-minded blueprint of Jay-Z or the commercial dominance of 50 Cent. In the 2010s, Drake became the model for blending genres and maximizing streams. But now, with Rakim's words echoing, a new standard is being set. Young rappers will look at Kendrick and realize that truth and courage might matter more than numbers. Already, you can see the ripple effect. Independent artists who feel pressured to sell out for streams now have an argument to stay authentic. If Kendrick can earn Rakim's respect by speaking truth, maybe that's the real path to legacy. Underground rappers on platforms like SoundCloud and Bandcamp are already referencing the moment, using it as proof that lyricism and honesty still have power. For them, Kendrick just became more than a superstar. He became a blueprint for how to do this, right? This could also reshape the industry itself. For too long, labels have pushed artists toward virality and numbers over authenticity. But if the culture keeps amplifying moments like this, where truth gets more respect than streams, the power dynamic could shift. Fans might begin demanding more substance from their artists. And artists might realize that long-term respect comes not from chasing charts, but from saying something real. Another major implication lies in the historical narrative of hip-hop. Every era has its defining voices. In the 80s, Rakim himself was that voice. In the 90s, it was Tupac and Biggie. In the 2000s, Jay-Z and Eminem carried the torch. And in the 2010s, many assumed Drake would hold that spot because of his dominance. But Rakim's endorsement rewrites that story. Now, historians will likely frame Kendrick as the defining voice of this generation, not Drake. And the evidence won't be sales or records. It'll be truth, validated by the God MC himself. Perhaps the most powerful outcome of all this, though, is the reminder that hip-hop is bigger than music. It's a culture, a movement, and a voice for the voiceless. Albums are important, yes, but moments of truth are timeless. Rakim's words crystallize that idea for the modern era. By elevating Kendrick's speech above any album, he reminded us all that hip-hop was never meant to be just entertainment. It was meant to be a revolution, and that's why fans are calling this history. Because it doesn't just define Kendrick's career. It redefines what we value in hip-hop itself. For decades, people argued about classics, albums, and numbers. But now, thanks to Rakim, the conversation has shifted. It's no longer just about who makes the most hits. It's about who tells the truth when it matters most. In that sense, Rakim's statement is bigger than Kendrick, bigger than Drake, and bigger than any one battle. It's a message to the culture. Authenticity is still the crown jewel, and whoever wears it will always be remembered. So fam, let's keep it real. What Rakim just did will be remembered for decades. He didn't just crown Kendrick. He redefined what hip-hop values. And now, the ball is in our court, the fans. Do you agree with Rakim that Kendrick's truth is bigger than any album? Or do you think Drake's catalog still holds more weight? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this debate is only getting started. And your voice matters in shaping how history remembers this moment. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. Because if Rakim is speaking and Kendrick is moving, then hip-hop is about to enter a whole new chapter. Hashtag Kendrick Lamar. Hashtag RAKIM. Hashtag hip-hop history. Hashtag Drake V's. Kendrick hashtag truth over numbers. Hashtag rap debate. Kendrick Lamar, @Drake, @Rakim, @Drake, @Rakim.